This woman was sentenced to death for murdering her husband. And the reason the Supreme Court got involved is her underwear. A prosecutor held it up in front of the jury and asked, "Is this what a grieving widow packs?" Her name is Brenda Andrew, and what her husband was doing when he died is the part I can't get past. And I don't think you will either. She asked him to come into the garage and light the pilot light on the furnace because it had gone out. That is the last thing anybody ever asked Rob Andrew to do. Almost 22 years later, she's on death row in Oklahoma, the only woman there. And what took this case to the Supreme Court wasn't whether she did it, because nearly a month before that night, somebody crawled under Rob's car and cut the brake lines. And the next morning, a woman called Rob from a phone that could not be traced, telling him his wife was in a hospital in Norman and needed him right now. And that same morning, a second caller, a man never identified, told Rob the exact same story. Norman is out of town, which was the point. They wanted him on a road. The emergency was a lie. There was no hospital. There was no Brenda. Just a road they needed him out on, in a car that somebody, apparently, wanted to see crash. And shortly after, Brenda walked into the bank in Norman where that first caller worked and asked her about the calls she had made to Rob. It didn't work. Rob checked his own car before he drove it, and he found the cut lines himself. And then he did the sensible thing and called the police, though what came of that report isn't in the court record. Now, this is where it stops being a plan and starts being a woman who can't keep her mouth shut. The next day, Brenda told Rob she had read about it, about his brake lines, in the newspaper. There had been no newspaper story, and nobody anywhere had printed a word about those brake lines. So now Rob is walking around with a fact you would not want in your head. His wife knew about those brake lines before a single word had been printed anywhere. I need you to hold on to that, because it changes everything about the night he died. The man Brenda was sleeping with was named James Pavatt, and Pavatt was Rob's insurance agent. And all three of them met at the same place: church. Brenda and Pavatt taught a Sunday school class together. You cannot make that up. And in February of 2000, Pavatt sold Rob a life insurance policy worth about $800,000. Rob moved out in late September, and Brenda filed for divorce a short time after that. It was still pending the night he died. They were never actually divorced. And I want to be straight with you about that policy, because everybody gets this part wrong. It was bought almost 2 years before Rob died, more than a year before he even moved out. It was not part of the plan. The plan came later, and one of the things they fought over was the policy and who controlled it. Because at some point in all of this, Pavatt went to his own daughter and told her something. He said, "You're never going to believe what that nuttier-than-a-fruitcake woman asked me to do." And then he told her what it was. Brenda had asked him if he would kill her husband, or if he knew somebody who could. And then he told his daughter that if she ever repeated it, he'd kill her too. And that daughter is the woman who made the hospital call. So after the brake lines, Rob went to take his wife off his life insurance, off the $800,000. And Pavatt, the man selling him the policy, the man sleeping with his wife, told him he couldn't. He said Brenda owned it. That was a lie. And Rob went over his head. He went to Pavatt's supervisor, and the supervisor told him the truth. Rob still owned his own policy. And then Rob told him something else. He told him he thought Pavatt and his wife were trying to kill him. He said it out loud, to a witness, weeks before it happened. And when Pavatt found out that Rob had said it, he became very angry. And he threatened to harm Rob for putting his job in jeopardy. And the state showed that jury that in those same months, somebody forged Rob's signature onto a change of ownership form and backdated it, moving that policy over to Brenda without him knowing. Which only works, of course, if Rob isn't around to check. In the days before Rob died, there were phone calls, and the state played the tapes for that jury. And you can hear what she was doing. Using their own daughter, Tricity, to get Rob to come to that house alone. And the night before, she was talking to a friend about Rob. What she said was, "I hate him. I hate him. I hate him." November 20th, 2001. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Rob is coming to collect his 2 children for the holiday. And you need to know how this normally goes. Brenda brings the children out to the car. He is on the phone to a friend while he waits, just talking, sitting outside the house he used to live in. Then the garage door goes up, and Rob ends the call and goes inside to get his children. That phone call is the last time anybody ever spoke to Rob Andrew. Except the children aren't ready. They're not packed. Nobody is standing there waiting for him. They're in the master bedroom, a long way from that garage, with the door shut and the television turned up very high. So Rob is on his own in that garage with his wife, and she asks him for a favor. The pilot light on the furnace has gone out. Would he mind? And he wouldn't mind, because it's a 2-minute job, and it is the sort of thing you still do. So he crouches down in front of it, with his back to the room. And you already know something he doesn't. And somebody points a 16-gauge shotgun at him from across the garage. Rob turns around, and he sees it. And he grabs a trash bag full of empty aluminum cans, trying to protect himself. The shot goes through the bag. The shotgun that killed Rob Andrew was a single shot, which means that after the first shot, somebody had to stop, break it open, take the spent shell out, put another one in by hand. That takes time. Not much, but it's not nothing. And Rob Andrew was still alive while it happened. Then whoever it was walked across that garage to within 3 feet of him and shot him a second time, where he lay on the floor. When the paramedics got to him, he was still clutching the bag of cans, and he was still alive. And who pulled that trigger? Nobody has ever established that. Neither of them ever confessed to police, not once in 22 years. And the state is going to tell that jury it doesn't matter anyway. So where was Brenda while that was happening? There is only one account of that, and it is hers. Brenda called 911. She said 2 masked men in black had come into the garage and shot her husband, and then shot her. She called twice, and on the second call, she told the operator something the state would use against her for the rest of her life. She told them Rob was breathing, that he was conscious, that he was trying to talk. About 5 minutes after he was shot, and the medical examiner testified that his death wouldn't have been instantaneous, so Rob Andrew was awake for it, in his own garage, for several minutes. He was still conscious even after the second shot. Emergency crews found him on that garage floor, and they could not revive him. Rob Andrew bled to death. The 2 children were in that bedroom the whole time, with the television turned up loud. They never heard any of it. The first officer through the door found Brenda sitting in the doorway to the garage, about 3 feet from her husband. He walked her out and sat her on the curb. Somebody needed to look at her arm. She was uncharacteristically calm, and the next morning, at the hospital, a witness saw her and Pavatt giggling together. Giggling. The morning after. And then the physical evidence started coming in, and it was bad. Brenda said she was shot from a distance, as she ran out of the garage into the house. An expert testified the muzzle of that gun was 2 to 4 inches from her arm, and the wound itself was superficial. And it wasn't only the state's expert who said that wound was staged. Brenda's own defense team put an expert on the stand, and that expert told the jury the same thing. Both sides, no argument about it. And there's a reason that matters, because a woman who shared a jail with Brenda Andrew got up and told that jury Brenda had confessed to her that the 2 of them killed Rob, for the money, for the kids, and for each other. And that Pavatt shot her in the arm, so she'd look like a victim too. And the 2 masked men she described to that 911 operator never appear in this case again. Rob was killed with a 16-gauge shotgun. Rob owned a 16-gauge shotgun. And when they separated, he told friends Brenda wouldn't let him take it. His own gun, left in her house. When police searched the house, that shotgun was gone. And it has never been found. Not then, and not in the 25 years since. And 8 days before the murder, a witness saw Brenda out at a target shooting spot near her family's place in Garfield County. 8 days. And then the neighbors came home, the Gigsteds, from the house next door, and found things inside that should not have been there. Somebody had gone up into the Gigsteds' attic through an opening in a bedroom closet. There was a spent 16-gauge shell on the bedroom floor, and 3 unfired .22 caliber rounds up in the attic. So the empty house next door is where the ammunition was. Now hold on to those 22 rounds, because about a week before the murder, Pavatt walked into a gun shop and bought a .22 caliber handgun, and that gun was never found. On the day Rob died, Pavatt borrowed his daughter's car, and the next morning, she found a .22 round on the floorboard, the same brand as the ones up in that attic, and Pavatt told her to throw that round away. It ended up in an evidence bag instead, and the bullet they took out of Brenda Andrew's arm, consistent with those too. So she wasn't even shot with the shotgun that killed her husband. There were no signs of forced entry at all, and the Gigsteds were out of town. Brenda had a key. She was house-sitting for them. So the one house nobody could get into, she could walk straight into. That shell on the neighbor's bedroom floor was the same brand and the same 16-gauge as the one police found in Rob's garage. And when the two were compared, the markings were similar enough that they could have been fired from the same weapon. Could have been. And Rob's own shotgun was never found, so nobody could ever put it side by side with the gun that fired them. And honestly, that gap never quite closes in this case. And in the days after the murder, James Pavatt started getting his affairs in order. He put his daughter on his checking account and asked her to clear his belongings out of his apartment. And he started reading about Argentina because he had heard it had no extradition treaty with the United States. Then the two of them asked Pavatt's daughter to help them forge something, a document with Rob's signature on it, giving permission for his children to leave the country. Brenda also moved money out of her own account and into the account of Pavatt's daughter, so it could follow them over the border. Before any of that, she'd sat down with the funeral director, and he asked her what she loved about Rob, what she would miss about him. And she said, nothing. He'd been doing that job for 25 years, and he told that jury it was the most bizarre answer anybody had ever given him. Rob Andrew's funeral was on the Monday after Thanksgiving. His wife wasn't there. She was in Mexico, with Pavatt, and with Rob's 2 children. Pavatt kept phoning his daughter from down there, asking her to send them money. What he didn't know is that his daughter was already talking to the FBI. So he's calling the person turning him in to ask her for money. They lasted about 3 months, and then they ran out of money. So on February 28th, they drove up to the crossing at Hidalgo, Texas, and tried to come home. Because running from a murder, it turns out, is expensive, and nobody even recognized them. An agent just ran the license plate, and it came back on a federal warrant, arrested where they sat. And that is when the state started building the case that would put her on death row. That was February 2002, and Brenda Andrew sat in the Oklahoma County Jail for more than 2 years before that trial ever started. It is the same jail where that confession came from. Brenda Andrew went on trial for her life in Oklahoma County in the summer of 2004, and the state had a genuinely strong case. I want to be honest with you about that, because everything that comes after it depends on it being true. The brake lines, the forged form, her wound at 4 inches, and Pavatt tracking Rob for the whole month before he died. Witnesses who said she told them she wished Rob was dead so she could get on with her life and collect that life insurance. That she would see him dead. That she was going to kill him or have him killed. And Rob himself, telling people he was afraid of the pair of them and that he believed they were going to murder him over that policy. A federal court would later list 25 more pieces of evidence against her, on top of everything it had already gone through. Hold on to that number, because it is what makes the rest of this so hard to explain. So the state didn't need to do what it did next. It did it anyway. Prosecutors put on testimony about her sexual partners, going back 2 decades, in a trial about a shotgun, about how often she had sex in her car, and about the clothes she wore to dinner, and what she wore to the grocery store. At least 2 witnesses took the stand in the guilt phase, the part where you decide whether she did it, and testified about nothing but her clothing. A man told the jury that when people saw her at a bar, the comment that was made was, "Who is the hoochie?" And a prosecutor asked a witness on redirect, "Does a good mother invite her boyfriends over to the house with the children in the home?" The judge let a lot of this in, on the basis that it went to her ability to manipulate men, which is the legal reason a jury got to hear what a stranger in a bar called her. And then in closing argument, the state held her thong underwear aloft in front of that jury, taken out of her luggage in Mexico, and said, "The grieving widow packs this to run off with her boyfriend. The grieving widow packs this to go sleep in a hotel room with her children and her boyfriend. The grieving widow packs this in her appropriate act of grief." The grieving widow. Over and over, until it was the only thing left in the room. There was blood spatter on the front of Brenda's jeans, and the state told the jury it proved she fired the second shot. They told them that when Rob turned to look at her one last time, the spatter shows you he saw her face over the barrel of a shotgun. That blood had never been tested, and her own expert had told that jury the spatter came from the second shot, not from her arm, and that if it was blowback, the person wearing those jeans fired the gun. And when they were asking the jury for her life, the state said there was no need to test it. You know whose it is. It's Rob Andrew's blood. And their own witness is the one who said that. Somebody tested it after the trial, and the scientist couldn't identify Rob Andrew's blood on those jeans at all. Although, to be fair to the state, it was a mixture. Most of it was hers, and there was a smaller trace from an unknown man, and the scientist couldn't say that man was Rob, but couldn't say it wasn't either. But here is what makes it stay with you. I mean, the state had already told that jury it didn't matter who pulled the trigger. They never needed the shooter argument. They made it anyway. In a death penalty case, on blood nobody had tested. And you are allowed to find that alarming without thinking she is innocent. And there were things that jury never got to hear at all. Things you are about to. A police sergeant would have told them that weeks before the shooting, Brenda asked him for extra patrols around her house because she was frightened of Rob. Another officer would have told them he found her kneeling over Rob, asking him to help her husband while she ignored her own gunshot wound. And a detention officer would have told them the woman who reported that confession was a known snitch. Known, she said, as the mouth of the South. The jury did hear that much from another inmate, who added that she never once saw Brenda talk to anybody. And after she testified against Brenda Andrew, her own federal sentence was cut. She had 1 year and 10 months left to serve. She was out in 5 months. The jury convicted Brenda Andrew of murdering her husband and of conspiring to do it. Then came the part where they decided whether she would live. And this is where it goes wrong in a way the courts are still arguing about. Her defense called her daughter, Tricity, to speak for her mother's life. She had written letters to her mother. She was going to read them out. And then she was going to be asked whether she wanted her mother executed. She got to the stand, and she was overcome. She couldn't read them. And in closing, the prosecutor told that jury, Tricity didn't beg for her mother's life. She was never asked. She was 13, and she broke down on that stand. A judge who read this case years later called that argument what it was: nothing but an attempt to enrage the jury. Part of the defense case was simple: spare Brenda, and her family can still come and see her, and the prosecutor turned that straight around. Rob Andrew's parents would like to visit their son too, and the only place they get to visit is his grave. In September of 2004, Brenda Andrew was sentenced to death, and that should have been the end of it.
It wasn't the end. Not even close.
Because Oklahoma's own appeals court, 5 judges, said it was struggling to find any relevance in all that evidence about her sex life. The state agreed with them, and the court upheld her death sentence anyway. 2 of the 5 wouldn't sign it, and one of them wrote the line this whole case turns on: a defendant must be convicted, if at all, of the crime charged and not of being a bad woman. She was not calling Brenda innocent. She was saying they did not have to do it like that. It went up to a federal court where a judge called her a scarlet woman, a modern Jezebel. He said the drumbeat on her sex life had plucked away any realistic chance that jury would seriously consider her version of events. He lost. Then the Supreme Court wiped out that ruling and sent the case back. And on the second look, she was denied again by the same judge who had called her a Jezebel 3 years before. In August of 2026, the full court refused to hear it one more time, and one judge dissented. To recite the facts is to state the fundamental unfairness of the trial that sent Andrew to death row. Brenda Andrew is on death row at Mabel Bassett with no execution date. In August, her lawyers said they would be back at the Supreme Court within 90 days. James Pavatt was tried separately, convicted and sentenced to death. And after his arrest, he wrote a letter to one of the Andrew children, saying he had got another man to help him kill Rob, and that Brenda had nothing to do with it. The state said the handwriting was consistent with his. His own lawyers said he never wrote it. He never took the stand.
So where does that leave you?
Because even if that letter were true, the state had already told that jury it didn't matter who pulled the trigger. And I don't think this is a case about whether she did it. The evidence against Brenda Andrew is heavy, and I think that matters. Every court that has looked at it has said so, including the judges who were hardest on that trial. The question is whether the state needed to spend that trial on her sex life to get there, and whether a jury that sat through weeks of it and watched a prosecutor hold her underwear up in the air could still weigh her life fairly. I don't know how you do that. Rob Andrew was 39. He sold advertising. He was a deacon at his church, and he had 2 kids he was picking up for Thanksgiving. His obituary says he thought letting them win at Nintendo was one of life's greatest pleasures. He is the one person in this whole story that nobody argues about. If you've got a view on this one, put it in the comments. Be careful who you trust, and take care of yourself. Everything here comes from public court records and news reporting. The images are illustrations, not footage. Some drawn from real photographs, others are best guess at people no camera ever caught. The facts are not a guess. All of it is true.